This episode of the Echo Ratings Eventing podcast is supported by our friends at Fairfax and Favour, and we wanted to tell you a little bit more about their extraordinary story. It was a story that began back in 2012 when two friends made a rather ambitious pact to combine their middle names and launch their very own footwear brand. They were actually funded by shifts at the local pub, and they then took a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Spain to find a factory that would produce luxury goods that would help kickstart the dream. From storing their precious new wares in a loft, launching on the show circuit and pursuing that dream, the Fairfax and Favour vision has since exploded, and there's a range now that includes bags, clothing, boots and sandals. The luxury shoe giants have an array of awards, including last year a Lloyds Bank Business Excellence Award, and they're passionate about raising money for charity and have already donated over £500,000 to really worthy causes. Their story continues, but for more information, go and visit their website, fairfaxandfavour.com. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing podcast and the next episode in our Hall of Fame series. Now, this series, listeners, it has been a little while since we've had an episode on the show, but it is one of our favourites. We've had some incredible names, we've had some incredible stories, the likes of Captain Mark Phillips, Mary King, Lucinda Green, the list goes on. And today's guest just has the most incredible story. She was the first woman to ever ride on a British Olympic eventing team. And I am delighted to say that joining me to talk to our very special guest, I'm going to say hello first to my partner in crime, Catherine Austin. This is a story that I feel we could just kind of keep peeling back the layers. I'm so excited, so looking forward to this one.
Yes, I'm delighted that we're speaking to the person in question. She is my eventing hero, and I don't say that lightly, as you know. I read her book, The Galloping Nurse, when I was a child, and at the time I was doing a bit of showing ponies, and I just thought it was wonderful. It was totally inspirational. This lady won badminton aged 20. Think about that now. But her career within horses and horse sport and eventing is so much more than a couple of successes and, hey, a gold medal. I admire her for what she's achieved, but what she contributes to horses, to horse sport and to our sport of eventing.
I think for me, actually, having paved the way for so many other people in so many different guises, whether it be sort of setting the standard, whether it be training as an official, just absolutely extraordinary. Listeners, I don't know why we're being secretive, because actually her name is in the show title. She is Catherine's equestrian hero. She is an Olympic gold medalist. She is, as I say, the first woman to ride on a British Olympic eventing team. Jane Holderness Roddam, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for asking me.
Oh, it is our absolute pleasure. Catherine and I are like kids at Christmas. It may be January that we're recording this, listeners, but we are looking forward to this one. Jane, first of all, set the scene for us. Give us an insight into your childhood and your family life, because really that's kind of where the love of horses came from. You were sort of born into it as such.
Yes, I certainly was. I was very lucky. I was the fifth of six children. So I had three older brothers, and Jenny Lauriston Clark, my sister, and one younger sister, Sarah. So with that lot, you sort of had to compete with whatever they were doing, and they were all horse mad. And so I became horse mad, I think, from literally riding in a basket chair, age 6 months, wobbling about on my pony. Well, actually, it was my brother's pony called New Moon. And generally, I just loved the whole scene and everything to do with animals, and watching my brothers breaking in some of the ponies that were fairly wild that my mother had bought at odd sales around the place. And I used to watch them putting a dummy on the ponies in those days and then jumping on them themselves. And there was a real bucking bronco thing. So that was always great fun to watch as a child, as you can imagine. And how they eventually, all these ponies settled down and got used to being ridden, and I was able to ride them. So it was just horses from the word go. So I'm so lucky that I've had that sort of time to see them from such an early age.
And where was this, Jane?
This was in Dorset, right on the coast between Charmouth and Lyme Regis, at a place called Catherston. And it was a family estate that had been left to my father through the generations. It was a huge house, really, or it seemed a huge house to me as a child. It was haunted by Judge Jeffreys, who killed so many Dorset people at the bloody assizes. And so historically, it was quite a scary and exciting place. So watching my brothers and sisters sort of do everything, they used to drive ponies in a trap, they would hunt to trial them, point to point them. I got involved in every aspect of the horse world from the word go.
And showing was something that you and your sisters competed at and did brilliantly at. Did you enjoy the showing? How do you think that showing ponies helped you in your eventing career, possibly?
Well, I think I did enjoy the showing. We seemed to be standing around a lot, but there was also a lot of fun, and there was always somebody to talk to next door to you. So, yes, I showed ponies from the age of 3, I think, in the leading rein class. I won my first silver cup at Richmond Horse Show in the leading rein class, and went on to ride. We did a lot of side saddle riding in those days. I'm not quite sure why, but I think my mother plonked me on a side saddle because I kept falling off. So often, every time the pony put its head down, I would go straight over its ears. And that's pretty well impossible when you're on a side saddle. So I was riding side saddle at least until I was about 10, I think, as much as I was astride.
You even went to America to show ponies, didn't you?
We did, yes. One of our owners, Miss Stubbings, took us 3 ponies and Jenny and me over to America, and we caused quite a sensation there because I don't think they'd seen many side saddle riders, and I rode side saddle. Jenny rode astride, and we did all sorts of strange classes, sort of hunter riding ponies and things like that. And we had to learn the ropes and how we should have had a sandwich in our saddle bag and things like that. And I remember the lady next door to me, a girl next door to me, the judge opened up her saddle pad to look at, see if the sandwich was in there. And of course, it was green mold. She'd forgotten to change it from the time before. I always remember that. But no, we had a great time, and that was a great trip, and started a sort of quite a regular trek from the ponies from the UK going over to America and vice versa, which went on for quite a long time. I'm not sure whether it happens now, but it did for a long time. And that must have been in about 1956 or something, probably 55 actually.
It wasn't long after that, really, that your brother Mike, who was obviously a fair older than you, actually went to the Olympics and competed at that level in eventing. And so that must have been the impetus for you to see eventing at the highest level.
Well, it certainly was. I mean, I absolutely idolised my brother Mike and watched him. And of course, it was so exciting when we eventually moved from Dorset, sad as it was, to move up to Badminton. We were at the next door village at Didmarton, right on the edge of Badminton Park, and we were allowed to ride in the park. So we did that in 1959. I think I was about 11. And so being able to watch the Badminton horse trials literally on the doorstep and go and ride round and look at some of the fences and watch it all was a complete inspiration. So, you know, I was determined to follow in that sort of sphere.
And what about our Nobby? When did he make his way to you? And what were your first impressions of him?
Well, they weren't great, actually, because he arrived on our doorstep. I think that first year we moved to Didmarton in 59, and a farmer arrived with him in the trailer and said, did we want to buy an oss? Well, he wasn't really an oss, he was actually a pony. So my sister Jenny took him down to Highgrove, where King Charles now lives, which was where we'd had the Pony Club camp, and took him down there. He was a 5-year-old at the time, and jumped him round some of the fences that we'd all been practicing over, and decided that he was worth doing something with, although he'd never been ridden as anything else other than a racehorse. And we'd bought him for £120. And I think my mother thought that he would actually do George Weldon, who was the next door neighbour and whose father built all the early badmintons and ran it for so long. Anyway, he then turned out to be quite nappy, and so we couldn't really sell him. And Jenny and my brother Mike tried to sort him out, and eventually got him doing a little bit more of what he should have been, and I was allowed to pony club him. And we sort of grew up from there together, really. And I took him to pony club camp. I remember winning my first Beaufort Hunt supporters tie if I did a clear round at the area pony club trial, and which I did. So I got my first tie of the Beaufort Hunt, which was very exciting. I've still got it to this day, I think. And from there, we went on and won the Pony Club Junior Cup, as it was then. I don't quite know what's the equivalent today, but he won that when the championships were actually at Burghley in 1964.
Because that Beaufort Pony Club team was pretty special, wasn't it?
Oh, it was, yes. And we all managed to join up the other day, which was lovely. So that year, I think it was me and Mark Phillips and George Weldon and Elizabeth Detizio, who used to help actually in the badminton office anyway. So it was lovely to catch up with her. And another year, it included Caroline Nordy, who was also one of my greatest friends. So, yes, it was a special team.
It's a long way, isn't it, from pony club to badminton? I mean, longer now, probably almost certainly.
A lot longer now, because, of course, badminton was actually my first 3-day event. In those days, you could just go and compete round an open class, as it was, but there used to be just novice and open classes in horse trials. So all I had to do was complete an open course, and then you were qualified to go to badminton, for which you paid a £5 entrance fee. So it was all very simple. No, it was an amazing experience. Obviously, I was terrified when it actually came to the fact of actually riding there. And I remember my brother coming to the start of the cross country when I was actually pea green with fright for my first badminton, and telling me, saying, "You'll never get that lop-eared creature around here." And I was so cross at what he said that I kicked off out of the start box with such a kick. I shot round.
Did he know, Jane, that actually you were going to be really cross? And was that his way of giving you the appropriate pep talk?
It was absolutely his way of giving. He knew his sister quite well. The best way to make me do something was to tell me I couldn't. So it had. He well knew that it had the opposite effect. So I shot out of the start box. I remember kicking all the way around, really, because I was so cross at what he'd said. But anyway, we made it round and we finished 5th that first year. We actually, I couldn't stop, so we ran out at one fence in Huntsman's Close and had to come back and redo it. But and then on our second occasion, of course, we were lucky enough to win. So he was an amazing pony.
Yes, it makes it sound rather more simpler than it was, because by that stage, I mean, we say you were born into a horsey life and how wonderful it was, but actually, you know, very sadly, you lost your parents fairly early in life, and you also wanted to have a career, didn't you? And that wasn't in horses.
No, it wasn't. I always wanted to be a nurse, to follow in what my mother had done. And sadly, yes, my mum died when I was about 15 and my father died when I was 18. So neither of them sadly saw me going around badminton, which was very sad. But I was very lucky with all the family, you know, looking after me and my younger sister, Sarah. And Jenny had us to stay down in her a flat in her house, which her mother-in-law very kindly set up for us to live in. So I lived in the New Forest and had regular training with Jenny, although I'd started training at the Middlesex Hospital as a nurse when I was 18. And they very kindly let me off. In fact, the matron was the aunt of somebody called Mary MacDonald, who'd ridden in European Championships before. So luckily, she understood what I was requesting when I said, could I be on the rota that allowed me to be off for the badminton weekend.
I remember very clearly in your book, you know, how did you get fit enough to ride at badminton, Jane, with, you know, being in London and the horse somewhere else?
Well, that was one of the big things. I used to go skipping on the hospital roof. I started doing 100 skips and ended up doing 800 skips on the hospital roof and running up to the 6th floor each day to do that. Certainly helped to keep me fit. And then I would drive down to the New Forest where our Nobby was being kept by Sister Jenny. and rode him sort of every other day, really, because the nursing rota meant that I was either working, most of the time anyway, either working a morning one day and an afternoon the next, or similar like that. And of course, we had to do 1 week's night duty once a month. So I used to go down and ride every other day when I was nursing on night duty, and sleep really well in between. But it was quite hard work. But you do those crazy things when you're young, don't you? And you don't think much of it at the time.
And it's kind of worth it if you win badminton as a result. So,
well, absolutely, yes.
That must have been something that you'll never forget.
No, I certainly won't. No, and very special to have my little pony clubber to take me straight from not only from the winning the pony club championships to go and win badminton and then go on as we did to the Olympics.
I mean, he literally was a little pony almost, wasn't he? Because I think you even got him down. He had to measure in at 14.2 to do some showing classes, and then he needed to measure in at 15 hands for the Olympics. And he was sort of somewhere in the middle.
He was, absolutely. And that was the slight problem, because in those days they had to be 15 hands. And it did take a couple of goes, really, before we could get a vet to measure him. And I remember my father helped considerably by having a jolly good lunch for the vet that came, Barclay Watson, who came to lunch. And then we decided to measure Nobby after a really good lunch, where he'd filled him up with lots of whiskey. And we'd instructed all the girls in the who were looking after Nobby at the stables to bang all sorts of drums and things like that and make a real noise, so that he just did manage to hit the 15-hand mark once. And the vet sort of in a slightly alcoholic haze said, "Yeah, that'll do," and signed a bit of paper. And away we went. So that was really lucky, because he wasn't. He was about 14.3, really.
And what was the build-up to those games in Mexico like in 68? Was it 68, I think it was?
Yes.
Because you'd won badminton, you were only 20 years old. You'd obviously seen your brother competing at an Olympics, but an entirely different experience doing it yourself. So what was that like? And what are your memories of kind of the build-up to the games?
Well, of course, it was a complete shock that we won badminton anyway, really. So that was the start of it. And then somebody said, "Oh, you'll be going to the Olympics," which hadn't really sort of entered my head at the time, because we were so excited about winning badminton. And then we got onto the short list. There were three of us on it that had done well at badminton that year. There were 8, I think, on the list. Then we were told what we would have to do to compete at a final trial where the selection would be made finally, which was going to be at Burghley. We would have to do the long format complete trial at Burghley. So, we didn't actually in those days think very much of that, the fact that it was a 16-mile course or whatever it was, with the roads and tracks and steeplechase and everything else a month before you went off to the Olympic Games. People didn't really worry about that in those days. And I went to, eventually, having had some good training with Bertie Hill, who was the team trainer, which included having gallops at Ascot Racecourse, and we stayed at Riversdale Park and were all trained together. We could only be together for 3 weeks, I think. And we probably did a week's training at Ascot and Riversdale Park before we went to Burghley. And we'd been told not to tire our horses out, just to go slowly. Well, of course, our Nobby didn't do slow, and I'm not sure that I mentally did either. So I did it in spite of all the hard work that had been put into my dressage, which had never been good, and Jenny had helped so much. Of course, he blew his top when he went into the arena. So we were, I think, 33rd out of 36 competitors after the dressage. And in spite of being told to go slowly around the cross-country and steeplechase, he did again. He shot up from 33rd to be lying in about 3rd place, I think, at the end of the cross-country. And luckily he went his usual clear round show jumping. So we finished up 3rd and, yes, were selected for the team. So that was all very exciting. Then, of course, it really did hit home that we were going to go to the Olympics, all being well. But the thing that people had sort of, well, you didn't think about again in those days, particularly, that actually it would have taken a bit out of our Nobby because of the speed he always went round everything. And he did end up being a little bit shin sore because of the jarring of all the extra work, really, that he'd been doing. So it was a bit of a worry when we got to Mexico, because I remember Jenny having to stand him in the river to cool his legs down because of the hard ground over there. So it's like touch and go at one moment to whether he was going to be sound. But anyway, it was a tremendous team atmosphere, and the vet, Peter Scott Dunn, was marvellous. He'd done a lot of research in how the water needed to be specially filtered for the horses, and how they needed to have aluminium shoes, especially thick because of the rocky ground and the fact of not wearing the horses out too much. Because, of course, in those days, we used to have to carry a minimum of 1111. So, they were carrying quite a weight.
Yeah, how much lead were you carrying, Jane?
Well, I regret to say that I was not the lightest member of the team that went out there. I only carried about 6 pounds, I think, of lead plus the weight cloth. Ben Jones was much lighter than me, and I think even Richard Mead was lighter than I was. So I was quite a well-endowed girl at the time. So poor little Arnobby had to sort of carry all this anyway. But it was probably just as well that it wasn't sort of a lot of dead weight, and that it was actually me in a way.
And the whole thing, though, was extraordinary. I mean, how did, it was because the altitude, you were high up, weren't you?
Yes, we were very high up. And my brother had been very insistent that I did a lot of running before I went there to make sure that I was fit enough and wouldn't let the side down, because he was a fitness fanatic and had always been taught, having been in the army himself. And anyway, he was very keen on personal fitness. So he had made me run, and I used to run a lot before I went out there, and even when I was out there. But that was definitely stood me in good stead, because the altitude made a huge difference to quite a lot of people, and quite a lot of people actually almost collapsed with the rarefied air. But again, the doctors and everything concerned with the team had put us on special blood pills to make our blood thicker, I think, in the rarefied atmosphere. So a lot had gone into the actual planning of the whole Olympic setup, both for the horses and for the humans. And we were sort of monitored pretty regularly and had to make sure that we didn't overdo it or underdo it and all that sort of thing. So both from the horses and the humans, there was quite a lot of science, as it was then, that went into the planning of everything.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't realise that element of it then. But cross country day, when did it start raining? Because I read these descriptions of cross country day, and they seem so improbable now, just because it wouldn't happen, would it? We wouldn't run an event in those conditions.
No, it definitely wouldn't. But what was good about it was that the rain had been sort of doing everything at about lunchtime. It had absolutely poured pretty well every day. Everything was baked hard in the morning, and then at about lunchtime it always poured with rain. But so the competition was did start early at 8 o'clock in the morning. But unfortunately, that particular day on cross country day, it decided to start raining halfway through. Because I was number 2 in the sort of safe slot to go, I just missed the worst of the floods and the rain. I'd gone just before that. The water had sort of swollen and the rivers were getting quite deep, but I didn't have too much of a problem going around myself. But for the last 2 members of the team, Ben Jones and Richard Mead, Richard went through absolute torrential rain, but still managed to achieve a clear round. And Ben Jones said he literally couldn't see where he was going. The fences just loomed up at him, and he had to literally drop down into the water jumps. There were about 3 water jumps we had to go through, and he sort of literally had to pull up because the water had swelled over the top, and all you could see was 2 flags in about sort of 40 foot of water where it had sort of broken its banks. And he would just sort of walk through this and slosh into the actual jump part of it and scrabble out the other side. And we were all there helping to put twigs to show people where the edge of the fence was. It would never have happened nowadays. But anyway, everybody was helping everybody to get around. I was lucky, really, because I went just before all the deep water and the floods happened, because I think poor little Nobby would have been drowned, really, being so small.
The Irishman Tommy Brennan always said that he did nearly drown because he couldn't swim or something.
No, he couldn't swim. So, of course, there were lots of yells and screams for poor Tommy. So we all had to be there ready to pull him out should he fall off. But no, there was a lot of really good, proper team spirit for everybody, really. It was an amazing atmosphere.
And you won the gold medal, and that's,
Team, yes. I mean, the team went really well. Major Derek Al Hewson got the individual silver medal, which was amazing. I actually had those two falls because little Nobby couldn't get his feet out of the mud. Both times at the open water, he jumped it, but just couldn't get his feet out of the mud in time. We sort of crashed on landing, but he still did the second fastest round of the day, which was amazing.
And things were very different then, weren't they? Because you were able to get back on and continue.
Oh, yes, you could have fallen at every fence, I think, and got back on and carried on. But in those days, so yes, you just got back on again and carried on. In those days, it was a rather different sort of attitude, I suppose, because, you got to the end at all costs, really. So things have improved a lot because, in a lot of ways, it was probably at the detriment of the horse. And little Nobby, a few days later, was really crippled with the bruising that he suffered. And I'd actually cracked 2 vertebrae in my back without knowing it. So, you can see now why, thank goodness, people say, right, stop, because, with the adrenaline rush and everything, my whole thinking was I must get to the end and mustn't let the team down. But actually, Nobby was actually pretty badly bruised, although he seemed fine, and I had actually cracked 2 vertebrae, which didn't do me a lot of good either.
And you made the decision post-Mexico to actually retire our Nobby, didn't you? I mean, he had just been extraordinary for you. Pony Club horse, or Os, I should call him.
Absolutely.
And he took you all the way up, not only winning badminton, but a team gold in Mexico as well. I mean, he really was the horse that kickstarted your career.
Absolutely. I mean, he was just brilliant. He gave me everything, really, taught me everything. And he was an extraordinary little horse, because I was so lucky having 2 complete opposites, because he wasn't really very bright, I don't think, but he was as brave as a lion. And I always described the 2 good horses I had with our Nobby being the one that would have jumped. If I'd asked him to jump off a cliff, he would have gone. But if I'd asked my next horse, Warrior, to jump off a cliff, he would have stopped dead, and I would have gone straight on over the cliff, and he wouldn't have cared at all. But Nobby was just, he just acted as you asked him. He just did what you asked him to do. He never thought about anything. His whole thing was just forward, really.
And talk to us about Warrior, because how did that transition happen? You've obviously had an incredible horse in our Nobby. Were you still nursing at this point? And when and how did Warrior come into your life?
Yes, I was still nursing and finished my nursing training sort of 2 years after Mexico. And I had a few other nice horses to ride. But my next really good one was Warrior, who I think we got in about 74 or 75, sometime later. And he came from John Shedden, who, of course, was one of the early winners of badminton horse trials and had been very well trained, and was ridden by Sheila Michael, who'd got him up to intermediate level very successfully. So a lovely lady from America, Susie Howard, who's a great friend of my brother's, had seen me ride in Mexico and wanted me to have a horse competing. And I think Brother Mike had persuaded her to let me be the rider. And she bought this horse, Warrior, literally over the phone, because she just saw a photograph of him. And I made the mistake of photographing him with the little horse we had of hers, who was a very attractive Anglo-Arab. And Warrior looked, really like a sort of heavyweight hunter beside Magic Lantern, who was incidentally used in the film and ridden by Tatum O'Neill in the film International Velvet. And anyway, when she saw the photograph of Warrior, her one comment was, "He looks very strong." So I thought, oh dear, we better make sure he does quite well, because I think she'd paid in those days quite a large sum of money for him. Anyway, Warrior I took to Bramham as his first 3-day event. And unfortunately, they'd failed to change the flags for the section I was in. I jumped a fence that I hadn't actually walked in the way that had to be jumped, because when I got to this fence, I was first to go at Bramham in my section. It was always in sections in those days. And the big section had to go straight ahead, but my section was meant to come up from the side and jump across a slightly easier route. But when I got there, they hadn't changed the flags. So I thought, oh my God, I must go through the red and white flags. So I went straight on over this fence, which actually, because I didn't really sort of approach it properly, Warrior put his foot on this. It was a ramp. It was a Normandy bank type of fence. And he put his foot on this ramp and shot me over his ears, came down on top of me, landing, literally pinning my hairnet with one foot. And I landed sort of face up to watch him following me over. But anyway, I then heard Lady Hugh Russell coming in her mini-moke, who used to train us, and thought, oh my God, I must get out of the way before she comes and tries to tell me to do something different. So I shot up, in spite of being quite well concussed, I think, and continued round. And we actually finished Bramham, and it was all we had to do to qualify to go to Burley later in the year. So it wasn't a very auspicious start to Warrior's career. But anyway, when we went to Burley, he had learnt a lot by then and was a much more confident horse. And we went round the year when they moved the steeplechase from going round the steeplechase field, which I can't quite remember where it was, but into a stubble field, because it had been so wet. Well, in fact, it had been so dry beforehand that they moved it onto a stubble field. And then, of course, it poured the night before, and the stubble field turned into a complete bog. I was very disappointed when I went round, because I think I had something like 9 time penalties around the steeplechase, which, of course, I'd never done before. Never had a time penalty on the steeplechase. And we were all very disappointed in Warrior and thought he was a real slow old moke. Anyway, it turned out that everybody else actually was slower than me because of this. Even Chris Collins, who was the expert steeplechase rider and was a future teammate. But it turned out that actually he wasn't that slow at all, and went round the cross country and did really well. We were standing second, I think, at the end of the cross country. And Toby Sturgis was in the lead, and he, unfortunately, poor chap, had a fence down. So Warrior won. So it was all very exciting. And that was the first year that they actually did the show jumping in reverse order of merit. Really? Now, of course, it's commonplace, but that was the first year. So it was sort of quite nerve-wracking being that, that first year thinking, oh gosh, at least we've done a clear round in the show jumping, and imagining we were going to be second. And then suddenly heard this groan when poor Toby had a fence down, and Warrior went on and won.
So that was your Burley win on him, and yes. Then took him to the Europeans the following year? The
following year went to the Europeans, and I think we were 4th individually, and in the gold medal team with Chris Collins and Clissy Strawn and Lucinda Green. Wow. So that was very exciting. And then the following year, of course, was Badminton 78, when Warrior went on and won Badminton.
How different was that to your first Badminton win?
Well, I suppose one was much more confident because sort of I knew he could jump the fences, whereas with Little Arnobby, I suppose I was at the stage of coming out of Pony Club and that sort of thing, to sort of not knowing whether I could really do something like Badminton. So I was much more confident going there. He was a very good jumper, Warrior, and I'd had much more sort of training as well, with various people helping with both my dressage and show jumping. Dick Stillwell, Gunnar Anderson, various people like that who'd been really helpful. And of course the team riders were all very experienced. So I was much more confident in everything, and probably more competent too than I was with Little Arnobby. So yes, I mean it just all seemed to go really well sister Jenny had helped enormously, as always, and brother Mike was always there to help me and advise me and tell me what I should or shouldn't do. So altogether, I think the whole partnership was a more professional and ready to sort of do things partnership at the time when I actually went that time.
And actually, I know you mentioned that Warrior was in International Velvet, but you were in International Velvet as part of the body double as well, weren't you?
I doubled for Tatum O'Neill. Sister Sarah was actually had a proper part in it. She was Beth, the spare rider. So yes, it was great fun doubling for Tatum O'Neill, jumping all the fences. But actually probably more scary than going around the whole course itself, because you had to do it to order. So, literally they'd get the clapper board there saying, right, you're going to jump this fence, which, was one thing if you jumped it as fence 5 or 6 on a course where you'd got your blood up and you'd got going, but to suddenly have to jump down Capabilities Cutting or something just like that was quite scary. I mean, Warrior sort of very quickly got to know about the clapperboard, and as soon as he heard it going, clonk, off he went. He knew exactly what he was doing, because he was a highly intelligent horse, too intelligent for me sometimes. And he was a great favourite with the film crew, because we always used to get coffee and biscuits on arrival, and somebody gave Warrior the plate of biscuits, which was a mistake, because they discovered that he only liked Royal Scot biscuits. So he picked out the Royal Scot biscuits and wouldn't eat any of the others. And so this he had to do every time after that, because different people, different sort of actors and things came along and said, please, can we feed Warrior his biscuits this morning? So he became quite a favourite.
It takes cross-country schooling to a whole different level, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. Yes, absolutely.
You have a great old boys club of eventing. Were you in International Velvet? I'm sure all sorts of people claimed to be in it when they probably weren't.
Oh, there were so many people. Yes, I mean, it was great fun. We all had a great time doing the filming. There were all sorts of people: Julian Seaman and Tiny Clapham and Richard Mead and Alistair Martin Bird, who sadly, the funeral I went to the other day. There were lots of old eventers that came along to do that, to be the extras in the film. So it made it a really fun experience.
And there was another championship that's 78 after you'd won badminton that autumn. That was a rather different experience, wasn't it?
That was a very different experience, and probably one of the worst experiences I've ever had in my life, because because of the heat and the humidity in Kentucky. Nowadays, of course, it wouldn't happen, but in those days, you carried on regardless. And the combination of the heat and the humidity made it virtually impossible for the horses, and the humans really, to compete in those conditions. It was just far too hot. And Warrior, being rather a heavier type of horse, he simply couldn't quite cope with those conditions, and literally I felt his legs just literally give way as he tried to jump into the water jump, and he sort of collapsed on top of this fence, again a sort of sloping fence off a bank into the water. So it was horrible, because he was going so well, and then literally it was just as if the whole sort of candle had gone out, really. He just literally couldn't. But again, because of the team sort of competition, I had to try and get round, and had to turn him round when normally, of course, one would have retired. But I had to go back and try and jump this fence again, and he did jump in. And I think the water revived him a little bit, actually, and me. I fell off. And one clambered back on again, and he went on for another 7 fences. But this notorious fence, it was a sort of zigzag of zigzags. It was at the fence 27, quite near the end of the course. But he literally collapsed. He jumped the first part, and when I turned him to go the second, he just couldn't. And it was just one of those awful experiences that I never want to live through again, because one knew you should have he just couldn't do it. And it was just horrible. And there were several horses there in that heat and humidity that just couldn't cope. And the stables that night were probably the most horrible sight I've ever seen. There were 6 horses standing up and everything else was just laid down, just exhausted. But the good side of that was that then all these new rules and regulations came in about the combined heat and humidity that, at a certain level, no competition is allowed to run anymore. Horses have to be pulled up if they're tired. There's all the good things that came out of that, thank God. But it was a horrible experience and one I shall always regret that I was involved with, I suppose.
It wasn't the end of Warrior's career.
No, it wasn't, but he was never the same again after that because Warrior was such a cocky horse. He was a typical sort of extrovert. He'd have been the most wonderful actor on the stage because he'd have just loved all the excitement of the people clapping at him, and he loved that anyway. And that's what really, he was such a showman. But he was never quite the same after that. And in fact, it took some time to regain his confidence. And I took him eventually because he wasn't really doing very well when he came back and he just didn't look himself and he just mentally was depressed, really. You could see he was. So I took him to a little hunter trials and took Rosette along with me. And we went round the sort of, I don't know what it was, the 3-foot jumping class or something. And I could feel that, to start with, he was just really cautious about everything he jumped. Anyway, by the end of it, he was flying along. And when we finished, I pinned a rosette up on his bridle and took him back into the lorry. And he started to shake his head and saw the rosette sort of fluttering by him. And you could see from that moment, he sort of said, oh, perhaps I am a star again. And that was lovely to see. And then he really recovered quite quickly and went on to go round badminton again, not the next year, but actually I think it was Burley he went round where he was 3rd again. Yeah. So he did really well to do that because unfortunately, he had actually, he tweaked a tendon at the badminton that we took in the next year, which we never should have done. It was too soon. He seemed all right physically, but he wasn't actually. And so then he was retired after he did that Burley. But he went on doing hunter trials and all sorts of things after that. And he was brilliant with the disabled, actually, because I was involved with a charity called the Fortune Centre of Riding Therapy. They used to send students to us. And there was this one girl particularly who was determined she was going to ride him. And he was just brilliant. He just took her cantering across the field and we went over a couple of little jumps and he was just as good as gold. He wasn't always very good with me, but he was terribly good with them. And whereas our Nobby, was absolutely hopeless. He just wasn't going to be anything other than being ridden by me or somebody he thought he could sort of, decide to take along. But Warrior was brilliant with lots of people.
Can I ask you, Jane, about West Kingston Stud? Because yourself, along with husband Tim, you'd obviously had a passion for breeding through your parents and everything else, but introduce us to West Kingston Stud and I guess tell us a bit about the journey that it took you on over the years, because it's a remarkable story in itself.
Yes, well, Tim was luckily very supportive of my career, which was so lucky for me. And he was very interested on the stud side of it. And when I got married and we moved here to West Kington, we thought we would probably start as a competition yard and possibly breed a little bit. And then Tessa Clark, who'd been with my sister for several years and helped with Catherston Stud, when Jenny moved house, she thought probably it was time for her to move on. So she came to us and helped us set up the West Kington Stud and was with us for 25 years. And I suppose because Jenny was doing the Catherston Stud, which my parents had started as a pony stud, and which we sort of started in the 50s because we used to ride all the ponies that we had bred, that turned into obviously less ponies and more horses. Jenny did a lot of warm blood breeding. I thought I would go more into the competition type breeding for eventing. So we literally started off with Tessa's help and went from strength to strength, really. We had a lot of horses standing here and they all did really well. We started off with a thoroughbred stallion, Meadowbrook, who came from the north of England, and he produced 70 points winners, and also had a horse that went round the Grand National and Badminton in 1 year. I can't remember which one it was, but that was great fun to watch those two horses. And he continued to breed some good eventers as well. But we've had several other horses, and recently Kevin Zed, and now we've got a nice thoroughbred horse, Jamhuri, and a little Connemara stallion of our own, and we stand several of other people's as well, including, of course, we've stood Nick Gauntlet's Party Trick, who died so tragically a couple of years ago. We now have the half brother, the after party and things standing here. In between their competition years, several of the Billy Stud horses, and we've had lots of different horses. We try and have a little bit of everything to keep it sort of relevant so that people can produce horses for all different spheres of the disciplines. So it's been great fun, thoroughly enjoyed it, and we love seeing all the mares and foals out in the fields. In the spring, it's a wonderful sight, and we train students up to help become stud managers and all that sort of thing, as well as competition riders.
When your own career in eventing came to an end, when did you become involved in other roles in the sport, and have you enjoyed that side of it?
Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed that side of it. I've done all sorts of things. I suppose we were always brought up to get as involved as possible and to sort of contribute something back into whatever we'd had a lot of fun out of. And so it was fairly natural to become a judge in eventing and eventually to become a steward. And I was chairman of the sport. I was chairman of selectors. And on the FEI side, I became a technical delegate and an FEI judge as well. So that's been wonderful and taken me all over the world, I suppose, doing that and seeing the sport from different levels. And through all that, I also got involved in various charities, World Horse Welfare, the Brook, the Fortune Centre of Riding Therapy, and the showing sort of things I've been involved with, and the Side Saddle Association, Caspian Horse Society, lots of different organisations that I've been involved with, which have all helped me so much. And I suppose it's through horses that one's been able to have such a wonderful life, meeting so many people and travelling, because it's all been down really to one's involvement with the horse.
What do you think of the modern sport of eventing, Jane, as it is now?
Well, it's very different. I don't think you can really quite compare it, because in my day it was literally more like a pentathlon, so you needed a more of a good all-rounder. And although the endurance side of it has sort of gone in some ways in the fact that it's not as long distance-wise, it's so much more technical nowadays that I think that it's just as demanding in a way. Some people say it's not as demanding, but I think it's just as demanding, particularly mentally for the horse and the rider, actually, because, you know, the fences are much more technical. You have to be sort of with a horse that can think very quickly to adapt to the different types of fences that they jump now. In my day, they were big and bold, but you had plenty of room to do various things to see exactly where you were going. Nowadays, they're twisting and turning. And I think it's just probably got to be quite careful that it doesn't go too far. We keep talking about the welfare of the horse, but I don't think we should think that progress necessarily needs to change the aspect of the sport. I think we've just got to be careful to remember that a horse will always be a horse, and we mustn't demand too much of them, even though the riders are able to get more technical expertise and training. I think we still got to be careful, because if we overdo the sport or overdo the horses in the sport, it'll be very difficult to keep them sound enough to do what is, to my mind, the most exciting equestrian sport there is.
Yeah, agree completely. Jane, is there a horse competing now that you think, gosh, I wish, looking back, I could have had a horse like that, or that would tempt you if you had your time again to say, I'd really like to go and give this modern day eventing a go?
I don't think I would like to give it a go nowadays. I think I think they're very brave, all the riders of today, and I think the horses are amazing. I was very happy with what I did, and I think I'll just look back and enjoy watching the young do it as well as they do today. Good luck to them. They're great. Well,
do you know what? You absolutely paved the way.
And if you bred a badminton winner, that would be pretty cool too. So
that would definitely be very cool. I'll keep trying.
Jane, thank you so much. I mean, your career is just absolutely extraordinary. I feel like we've only scratched the surface in many ways. So thank you for sharing your story with us. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Not at all. I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you very much.
Listeners, we hope that you have enjoyed that as much as Catherine and I have. We're both sat here with huge grins on our faces, so we hope that you guys are too. Jane, thank you so much once again. Listeners, thank you. It is so good to have Hall of Fame back for 2023, and I'm sure that we will get another episode in the pipeline for you very, very soon. But for now, that is all we've got time for. Massive thank you, as always, for listening, and to Jane for sharing her story.